It started like any other morning. The coffee was still warm in her hand, her phone buzzed with back-to-back calendar alerts, and the folder she carried had nothing more than routine case notes. Pam Bondi had no reason to expect that today would be any different than the 1,000 hearings and briefings she'd already survived in Washington. But then her assistant looked up from his desk. Someone dropped this off earlier. No name, no note, just this. He held up a small, resealable plastic bag. Inside, a black flash drive, plain, no markings, not even a sticker, just empty silence in plastic form. Pam didn't flinch. She'd received anonymous tips before, most of them led nowhere. A few led to chaos. She took the bag, said nothing, and walked straight into her office. She closed the door, locked it, then slid the flash drive into her secure laptop. It clicked. A single folder appeared on her screen. Boasberg cases, red flags. That name, Judge Thomas Boasberg, federal judge. A name you didn't casually toss around in legal circles unless you were discussing restraint, precision, and predictability. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't controversial. He wasn't on the radar until now. Pam opened the folder. Dozens of PDFs loaded onto the screen. Some looked like generic case summaries. Others carried court seals, metadata headers, digital signatures. But one file caught her attention immediately. It was labeled Alterations Log, LSX, XLSX. She clicked it open and time stopped. It was a spreadsheet. Columns of docket numbers, defendant names, scheduled hearings, and then edits. Manual edits, timestamps deleted, court dates that once existed, now vanished. Entire hearings marked as dismissed, but with no recorded reason, no prosecutor objection, no signature trail. Some of the log entries noted that court documents had been accessed from Judge Boasberg's account, others from his clerks. One note simply said, "Case must be closed by Thursday, no trail." Pam's spine stiffened. This wasn't a clerical error. This wasn't a glitch in the system. This felt like surgery. Cold, precise, hidden. She leaned back in her chair. Her heartbeat wasn't racing. Not yet. But her instincts were screaming. Something here is wrong. Then, a second file. Correspondence. PDF. It was an email thread. 3 government email addresses. 2 were internal court staffers. 1 was unknown, but the header line made her blood run cold. Timeline coordination. Subject, LSX, B. At the bottom of the email chain, just before the signature block, was one sentence. Case must be closed by Thursday, no trail. The same words. Twice now. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared at that line, like it was a loaded weapon sitting quietly on her desk, daring her to pick it up. Then came the knock. "Pam, there's more. You'll want to see it." Her assistant stood at the doorway holding a manila envelope. Inside was a printed court docket, folded between 2 blank sheets of paper. It matched one of the cases listed in the spreadsheet. Supposedly, it had been closed 6 months ago, but according to the public court database, it had never even been heard. The defendant had been released. No hearing, no record, no explanation. And suddenly, it wasn't just one document on a flash drive anymore. It was a pattern, a deliberate one. Pam looked at the document, then at the screen, then back at the envelope. She didn't speak. But in that moment, everything shifted. The moment you go from guessing something is broken to knowing it is. And if you're watching this, ask yourself, what would you do, sitting alone in that office, holding evidence that could unravel everything while not knowing who sent it or why? Because for Pam Bondi, that morning wasn't just the beginning of a case. It was the beginning of a reckoning. There's a moment right after you uncover something that wasn't meant to be found when your mind starts to bargain with itself. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe it's out of context. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. Pam Bondi tried. She tried to rationalize what she saw on that flash drive. The altered records, the redacted names, the deleted hearings. But as each file loaded, the maybes started to disappear and the reality began to harden. This wasn't one broken case. It was a system with cracks running deep through the foundation. Over the next 72 hours, Pam barely slept. Her team, hand-picked, tight-lipped, and loyal, began running quiet checks. No emails, no cloud drives. Everything was printed, copied to encrypted USBs, and stored in lockboxes. No leaks. They found more. 6 cases, minimum, showing the same eerie pattern. Evidence submitted. Trial date scheduled. Then, silence. No rulings. No press coverage. Just a clean digital erasure, like they never existed. One of the prosecutors off the record told Pam's team he hadn't even known the case was dismissed until months later, when he noticed it had been archived without objection. His name was still on the filing. No one ever contacted him. Then came the name Pam couldn't forget. Leon Kramer. The trafficking case. She'd followed it a year ago. It had made headlines for a minute. Financial fraud, exploitation, interstate movement. The evidence was solid. She remembered that. So why was it marked closed due to lack of prosecutorial action? Pam clenched her jaw as one of her analysts read the follow-up. Kramer was released. Supervised custody. 6 months later, picked up again in Florida. Assault with a deadly weapon. She stared at the page. That wasn't a loophole. That was a failure. A system failure. And someone had signed off on it. Build me a timeline, she ordered. Every date, every signature. I want to know who accessed Judge Boasberg's chambers the day these files were altered. Pull surveillance logs if they exist, and I want it now. The room moved into action. Chairs slid, pens scribbled, printers came alive. But underneath the strategy was fear. Not the kind you show on your face. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that whispers, if this is real, how far does it go? Pam stepped away from the table and walked to the window. Below, the city looked normal. Office lights flickering on and off. Cars moving like nothing had changed. But to her, everything had. There was something else bothering her. Not just what was happening, but how quiet it was. If even one of these dismissals was intentional, why hadn't anyone spoken up? That's when her assistant knocked again. There's more, he said, this time hesitant. That email thread, the one from the flash drive? We found a second version of it on an internal courthouse server. It's encrypted, but the metadata shows it was accessed 2 weeks ago by someone outside the court. Pam's eyes narrowed. Who? He paused. The IP is registered to a political consultancy in Arlington. They've worked with campaigns and legal PACs, including ones connected to certain federal judges. She didn't speak, just stared at the folder in his hands. There was a pattern forming, one she hadn't wanted to admit. The files weren't just flawed, they were coordinated. And someone had gone to incredible lengths to keep that coordination hidden. At midnight, her office lights were still on. She sat in the dark, laptop glowing faint blue. Her team had sent another file, a memo, quietly extracted from a private backup system. It referenced a strategic delay in expected ruling. And then came the phrase that broke her. Keep things quiet until after the quarter closes. Quarter. Not court quarter. Fiscal quarter. This wasn't just legal manipulation. It was financial, calculated. And someone had been using the court like a chessboard. Not for justice, but for profit. She picked up her phone. I want everything on that consultancy, she told her analyst. I want to know who funds them. Sue, per Pascal C's, nonprofits, private clients, I don't care. Follow the money. By morning, the pushback had started. Subtle, quiet, calculated. An anonymous tip suggesting she had once mishandled evidence 2 years ago. A Senate colleague called with a friendly warning. Not everyone wants that judge touched, Pam. She hung up the phone. No emotion. Then she turned to her team. From this point forward, no digital communication, no phones, no email. We work with paper and offline drives only. Nothing leaves this room unless I say so. They nodded. No one asked why. Because they already knew. She wasn't investigating a bad judge. She was uncovering a quiet machinery that had been working under everyone's nose. And the worst part? It was designed to look like justice. Pam Bondi had been quiet for days. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from calculation. She had enough now. Enough files. Enough timelines. Enough names, emails, logs, and unexplained case closures. But more than anything, she had something most people never do. Clarity. The evidence wasn't just stacking, it was aligning. Every red flag on that flash drive was now backed by records, footage, metadata. She didn't have a theory, she had a map. And the map led in one direction. Judge Boasberg, a man who had built a career on caution, discipline, and silence. A man whose name never trended. A man who stayed out of headlines because headlines don't follow shadows. Until now, one of her investigators dropped a new file on the table. You should see this. It was surveillance footage, pulled from 3 separate days. Each timestamp matched the closure of a manipulated case. In each clip, a man appeared tall, suit, calm. He wasn't carrying anything. He didn't linger. He simply spoke to a clerk, nodded, and walked away. The same clerk, all 3 times. The man was later identified confirmed an attorney with direct ties to the Arlington consultancy, the same firm whose name kept appearing like a watermark behind every suspicious ruling. And still, there had been no objections. No news stories. No whistleblower inside the court. Just silence. Pam watched the footage again. Too short to be a meeting, she whispered. Too casual to be random. That's when she made the call. Prepare the complaint. We're going to the Judiciary Committee. Her team froze. One of them leaned forward. If we go public now, we're not, Pam cut in. Not yet. This stays internal. But I'm filing a formal complaint before the week ends. Another voice. What if they bury it? She stared at the whiteboard covered in arrows, names, and timestamps. Then we go louder. The next 48 hours were a flurry of printing, redacting, assembling. Not for drama, for precision. They weren't submitting theories. They were submitting proof. 32 pages, 6 altered cases, 3 confirmed meetings between Judge Boasberg's office and the Arlington consultancy. And a final document, the one that changed everything. It had arrived without warning. No envelope, no name, just a single line typed in bold. You're about to make a mistake. Pam read it once, then again. She didn't flinch. She slid the note into a folder, locked it in her desk drawer, and kept going. They weren't trying to scare her. They were trying to make her doubt herself. That's what systems like this depend on, not resistance, but retreat. And Pam Bondi wasn't retreating. Later that evening, she met with a senior official from the Judiciary Committee. Behind closed doors, no aides, no recordings. He flipped through the binder silently, underlined a few lines, then looked up. This is heavy. Pam nodded. If even half of this sticks, it could lead to a full ethics probe. He paused. You realize this won't stay clean. It's going to get political fast. Pam answered without blinking. I didn't bring this to you for politics. I brought it because a judge is altering the law from behind the bench. He tapped the folder once. Then we escalate. Quietly at first. The moment she stepped outside that room, her phone buzzed. Case number 7 had been found. Unlike the others, it hadn't been dismissed. It had gone forward just enough to look real. But the sentence was oddly lenient. More importantly, it established a precedent. A precedent that directly benefited 2 corporations, both tied to a former clerk of Judge Boasberg, now serving as a senior counsel at the Arlington consultancy. And that's when the light finally clicked on. This wasn't cover-up. It was strategy. She called an emergency meeting that night. Phones off. No internet. Just people, binders, and evidence. One analyst pointed to the fine print on a contract the consultancy had signed 3 months before the ruling. It projected favorable regulatory outcomes based on anticipated court leanings. Pam leaned in. They weren't hoping for a decision. They were pricing it in. The room went still. No more doubt. No more caution. The next move was clear. The hearing can't wait, she said. We file the complaint tomorrow. A junior analyst hesitated. You think it'll change anything? Pam looked up, steady. If it doesn't, then the problem is bigger than we thought. And with that, the turning point was set. She wasn't chasing whispers anymore. She was bringing them into the light. There was no dramatic music, no flashing lights, just the soft hum of fluorescent bulbs in a windowless room called Judiciary Committee, Room B. It was smaller than people imagined. 5 members sat behind a long table, a court reporter poised over a stenograph, 2 mounted cameras in the corners, silent, blinking red, no jury, no spectators, just facts and consequences. Pam Bondi stepped into that room like she'd done 1,000 times before. But this wasn't just another case. This was the case, and she knew it. Across from her sat Judge Thomas Boasberg, still, composed, wearing his judicial robe, even though it wasn't required, whether out of pride or defiance, no one could tell. He gave her a polite nod. She didn't return it. The chairman opened with a procedural preamble. Then, calmly, "You may proceed with your opening statement." Pam stood. No papers, no theatrics. Her voice was calm, but steady. "What I'm about to present is not speculation. It is not rumor. It is not partisan. It is a pattern backed by data, confirmed by logs, supported by video, and rooted in the silence of a system that chose convenience over accountability." She paused. "This isn't about one ruling. This is about the integrity of a bench that was supposed to be untouchable. And when the law begins to answer to anything other than truth, we all lose." She sat. The room was still. The chairman turned. "Judge Boasberg, your opening?" Boasberg leaned forward slowly. "I've served on the bench for over 15 years. My record has been affirmed. I've ruled on thousands of cases. And in every one, I have followed the law. Not politics, not pressure. If mistakes were made, they were procedural, not ethical. Certainly not criminal. It was the performance of a man who'd rehearsed those words in the mirror 100 times. But Pam wasn't here for theater. She was here for truth." The chairman raised the first case. Case 17-204, Davis versus United States. A screen behind them lit up with the public court record. Dismissed due to lack of evidence. Pam stood and held up the alternate file. Evidence was submitted and accepted 3 weeks before this ruling. A hearing was scheduled, then wiped. She clicked. An audit log appeared on screen. Timestamps, manual overrides, accessed from the judge's chamber. Boasberg didn't flinch. That dismissal was based on available records at the time. Pam responded instantly. Then why does the log show it was filed before the changes were visible in the public database? Silence. She advanced to the next case. Case 22-731, State versus Leon Kramer. Her voice was sharp, but even this defendant was released after a supposed administrative dismissal. Evidence had already been logged. Witnesses prepped. The hearing was deleted. Kramer later reoffended assault with a deadly weapon. She paused. And here's what matters. She held up a printed email from the Arlington consultancy, dated before the dismissal. Expected favorable outcome in case 22-731. One sentence, one paragraph, one truth. They knew the ruling before it ever happened. Boasberg shifted, folded his hands. "You're drawing lines between separate events." Pam didn't even blink. "I'm connecting dates, Judge. You gave them a map hand. They followed it." The committee stirred. The chairman asked, "Judge Boasberg, do you deny that your clerks had contact with this firm?" He cleared his throat. "I gave no instructions for external communication. If contact occurred, it was unsanctioned." Pam stepped in. "Then why have both clerks retained private legal counsel since this investigation began?" No answer. "Why have neither responded to the subpoena?" Still silence. She took a breath, lowered her voice. "They're not protecting themselves from you, Judge. They're protecting themselves from the truth." The room shifted. You could feel it. One of the committee members, quiet until now, finally spoke. "If even one of these cases was altered with knowledge, we're not talking about ethics anymore. We're talking about obstruction." Pam didn't hesitate. That's exactly what I'm saying. She placed the seventh file on the table. No docket number, no court record. A sealed case, erased from the system until now. Corporate espionage. National security violations. Buried. The consultancy involved? The same one. The contractor? Later received a major federal contract. The legal team? Former clerks, former insiders. Boasberg's eyes locked on the page. Pam didn't gloat. She simply said, "You sealed the case, but you forgot to seal the footprints." And outside that room, the media didn't know what was coming. The public hadn't seen what Pam had stacked inside those binders. But in that room, one truth echoed louder than any objection. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly how someone designed it. And now, someone was finally willing to name the designer. The room hadn't made a sound in nearly 30 seconds. No cough, no shuffle, no movement. Just the soft whir of the overhead fan and the quiet hum of a camera capturing everything. Judge Thomas Boasberg sat frozen. His eyes locked on a document Pam Bondi had just handed to the committee. A sealed case memo that wasn't supposed to exist. A case that had vanished from public record. No docket number, no defense attorney listed. Just a single note. Handwritten across the top. This one was buried. Pam stood still, calm. Her tone wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. What makes this case different isn't just the charges. It's the connections. A consultant tied to your former clerk. A contractor who later won a multi-million-dollar federal bid. And a sealing order that doesn't appear in the National Registry. Boasberg finally spoke. That case was sealed for national security. I followed protocol. Pam didn't move. Then why was the sealing order never logged? Why was the ruling timestamp altered manually? And why 3 days later did the Arlington consultancy bill that contractor for a resolution advisory service matching the court's language verbatim? Boasberg's hands were now folded tight, his jaw tensed. He tried to speak again, but the words stalled. The chairman leaned forward. Judge Boasberg, do you deny ever having contact direct or indirect with this firm? Boasberg cleared his throat. Slow. I had no direct contact. Pam didn't let him off. That wasn't the question. He blinked. Not that I recall. The committee exchanged glances. We have confirmation of 3 meetings between your clerks and members of that firm. 2 took place here. One of them the day the case was sealed. Pam stepped closer. This isn't about a mistake. This is about design. These dismissals didn't just happen. They were timed. They were anticipated. They were used to build profit. She held up a printout from a private consultancy forecast issued 3 weeks before the Kramer ruling. Expected motion to dismiss favorable outcome. Q2 projection confirmed. That wasn't a prediction. It was a guarantee. The judge looked down. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He sat, silent. And in that silence, the entire energy of the hearing shifted. The story was no longer about Pam Bondi making allegations. It was about a federal judge who couldn't deny them. One committee member leaned into the microphone. Miss Bondi, based on what you've submitted today, would you say this pattern demonstrates willful judicial manipulation? She didn't blink. Yes. And obstruction? Yes. The chairman's voice was steady. We will recess for 1 hour. When we return, this committee will vote to determine whether this matter escalates to a formal misconduct investigation, one that may include legal referral to the Justice Department. Pam returned to her seat. Behind her, one of her team members finally exhaled. They had done it. The impossible had cracked. The room emptied slowly. Boasberg remained in his chair for a moment longer, then stood stiff, robe hanging unevenly. As he walked past Pam, he didn't say a word. She didn't either, because what needed to be said had already been shown. 1 hour later, same room, same table, but everything had changed. The chairman read the resolution aloud. In light of the testimony and evidence presented, the Judiciary Committee is formally escalating this case to a full ethics and misconduct investigation. Judge Boasberg will be temporarily relieved of new case assignments pending outcome. That sentence didn't land with applause. There was no cheering. Only the heavy weight of a system that had finally taken a step toward accountability. The cameras rolled. The press outside the building hadn't heard the specifics, but they'd seen the body language. Pam Bondi stepped out of the committee chamber, flanked by her team. No statement, no press conference. Just calm steps toward the car waiting outside. Her phone buzzed. Another message. This time, one line. "They're not done." She looked at it, then deleted it. Because she already knew. People who pull strings in the dark don't go down quietly. They move. They adapt. They find new faces, new robes, new silence. But today, the silence cracked. And for the first time in a long time, the truth made it out of the building. Not as a whisper, but as a record. 2 days after the hearing, the story finally broke. Not from Pam, not from a press release, but from the committee itself. A leaked memo marked "Confidential, investigation underway." By morning, it was everywhere. News anchors debated legal precedent. Podcasters dissected timestamps and court calendars. Even late-night comedians took swings at the idea of a judge caught forecasting justice like it was the stock market. But for Pam Bondi, the noise outside wasn't the story. The story was what came after. In the weeks following the hearing, Judge Boasberg was placed on administrative leave. His clerks were subpoenaed. The Arlington consultancy went silent, its website down, its legal team issuing vague public denials. A full federal probe had begun. And yet, in all that chaos, no one ever came forward as the source of the flash drive. No name, no fingerprints, no video. Just a cheap plastic drive and the courage to send it. Pam never found out who it was. But maybe that was the point. Some battles aren't won with fanfare. Some are won in silence, when someone refuses to keep the truth hidden. She spent the next month in a strange rhythm, testifying, reviewing, preparing for the next wave. Colleagues who once avoided eye contact now pulled her aside in hallways to whisper, "I saw the files. I had no idea. Keep going." We needed someone to say it. And quietly, behind the headlines, something started to shift. Law students began asking about the audit logs in judicial ethics classes. A university in Virginia renamed its internal oversight module, the Bondi Model, Pattern Recognition and Systemic Proof. And one thing Pam never expected: a letter from a young woman in Ohio, second-year law student. No last name, just, "I used to think this system was too big to fight. Now I think it's too important not to. Thank you for making room for people like me." Pam read that one twice, then folded it, then cried. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because someone else finally understood what she'd been carrying. The official ruling came 6 weeks later. Judicial misconduct confirmed. Boasberg's resignation filed quietly. No indictment yet. But the findings were public. The patterns she exposed were now in the open. And then came the moment she hadn't planned for. A request from the Judiciary Oversight Committee. "We'd like you to help us draft a new review protocol, something permanent." Pam didn't answer right away. She thought about the risk, the threats, the unmarked envelopes, the voice on the phone that had once told her, "You think exposing this will fix something? It won't. It'll just shift the blame." Maybe that voice was right. Maybe the machine never really breaks. But then she remembered the hearing room. She remembered the silence. The kind that didn't come from fear, but from recognition. Recognition that the system hadn't failed overnight. It had failed in pieces. Slowly. And no one had said anything until someone finally did. She picked up her phone and said yes. 1 year later, Pam Bondi stood at a university auditorium on a stage she never asked for. Not as a politician, not as a pundit, but as someone who had refused to stay silent when silence became corruption. She didn't talk about Boasberg. She didn't talk about the threats. She talked about choices. "You don't need to be the loudest person in the room," she said. "You just need to be the one holding the right file. asking the right question at the moment when everyone else is hoping you won't. There was no standing ovation, just students leaning forward, listening. And for Pam, that was enough. Later that evening, she returned to her office. Same desk, same chair. And on the shelf, right next to a stack of ethics volumes, sat a small black flash drive. No label, no case number, just a reminder. That change doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes, it shows up quietly, in the form of one question that no one dared ask, until someone finally did.